and welcome to the Astranti Real-World Industry Analysis for the May 2018 MCS pre-scene on Menta. So Menta are a public transportation conglomerate, or corporate group rather, and they have a focus on buses. So we're going to go through an overview of the industry relatively briefly. This video is mostly aimed as an aid to the text rather than a replacement. So if you wanted extra in-depth information, it is best to go through the document yourselves as well as listen to my lovely dulcet tones. So as we move forward, I would like to make a note of how we use this analysis. So importantly, to these more broad exams, the MCS exams, the examiner's report is increasingly relevant. So with, say, F2, P2, E2, you have a very set theory and sort of questions that you will need to answer. These MCS exams are far more broad, and the examiner's report is a really useful resource to better your result and prepare better. So the requirement of the exam is going to reflect your role, and in the pre-scene we're told that you are a financial manager in Menta's head office, and your specific role is associated with a specific region that they operate within. Worth noting, this is not their domestic market. Centralia is their domestic market, and the Central Eurozone region seems to be a foreign market. So with that in mind, you're liaising with other colleagues, with other regions, but your primary responsibilities are mostly going to be management accounting in that specific region. So with that in mind, let's gear ourselves towards the industry and what we might want to expect in a contextual sense from the exam. So the public transport industry is relatively old, and we're not super interested in the mega old stuff. You know, it goes back as far as the 17th century with horse and cart in France, but more importantly it begins where the first bus route, arguably because it's a debatable topic apparently, is from Market Street in Manchester to Pendleton in Salford in 1824. And throughout these early years, we're seeing the companies crop up and horse-drawn buses to be replaced by the end of the 1830s with steam-powered buses. But more recently, of course, we're looking at motor engines and sort of diesel engines. So in 1923, this lovely yellow coach company, a manufacturing company, begun to model these buses with engine technology of modern times, not sticking with steam or using horse and cart. So sorry for the skip over there. And notably, the industry was hit by scandal in the mid-1920s, where General Motors purchased the yellow coach manufacturing company with the aim of essentially replacing streetcar or tram systems with buses to monopolize the sale of buses. So contextually, we know that the industry has had some fraudulence before. You know, the competition authorities may be quite strict, you know, just as a general idea that we're getting from this information. From the 1960s onwards, essentially we're looking at funding and subsidies from the government. Now, the US has pretty much always had private bus services, so therefore they were the first to realise that subsidies and government funding were actually really important to ensure that transport links were maintained and coverage was good, and economies usually flourish the more interlinked they are. So, you know, governments have a vested interest in this industry. So, taken as a whole, there's not a whole lot we can take in regards to the pre-scene. You know, the historical context shows us that perhaps the government links means that fraud is possible and the contractual nature. Fraud is possible in those kind of scenarios, so ethical employees could be at the forefront of our mind. But also, we're looking at subsidies. It's mentioned in the pre-scene that Menta like to go for those highly subsidized routes from the Centralia government. So perhaps it's going to be an ongoing idea as we go to the exam. Perhaps Menta will be analyzing whether a certain government subsidy makes a certain route particularly viable or maybe less viable, and therefore they won't bid for that contract. So, with this in mind, let's move on to briefly what the products are. So, obviously, tickets. Public transport is all about tickets and journeys, and there's a range. There's singles, returns, there's day tickets, essentially allow you to ride all day. There's season tickets, which are like a month plus. Mobile tickets, but they sort of are slightly different in terms of they can be day, single, return, but they're on mobile. So it's almost like a different mode of ticket. Not necessarily the type of ticket is still the same, like the options are the same rather. There's night tickets, weekly tickets, and monthly tickets. So, you get the gist. Loads of different versatile options for customers. So, sorry about that. As we move forward, research and development. So, this is quite an interesting area to look at for the industry because it shows us where Menta might be going wrong or where they might be doing well rather, and it sort of gives us this idea of what a new project might ensue. So one of the things is infrastructure demands are super high with the increasing urban population, and this will mean that essentially Menta will need to ensure that they can maintain services in these really busy, highly populated areas, and sort of the bus stations and terminals that are relevant to these dense areas can meet demand. If there's not enough bus bays for the amount of buses you need for the population, there's an infrastructure problem. So perhaps this is something that Menta will have to look into, maybe upgrading some bus stations, creating some new ones. It is very broad, we're very speculative from the industry context, but it's worth keeping in mind. So, on top of this, there are environmental demands. So, technology is moving towards biofuels, electric motors, and increasingly efficient systems that ensure emissions are low. So, this is something that we didn't get from the pre-scene. The pre-scene very much focused on, liters in regards to fuel. So this brings us to the idea that they were using diesel. There's no liters in electric rather, fuel, or not fuel rather, sorry, operation. So they must be talking about petrol or diesel. These are not environmentally friendly fuel types. So this may be something that Menta have to look into. Upgrading their bus fleet into electric buses, or perhaps utilizing biofuels that are less bad for the environment. Likewise, we see with products that Menta pretty much offer the same kind of tickets as the large companies in the industry do in the real world. So that's kind of befitting their large market share in their domestic market. So there's not a lot to say regarding products. You can safely say that a new type of ticket is not really going to be a particularly, predictable question because they've pretty much covered every base. So we're much more looking towards this R&D element where environmentally friendly fuels may be what Menta need to get onto. So as we move on here, we're going to get to customers and marketing. Now, importantly, this is not going to blow your mind. It's public transport. So who are the customers? Essentially, it's civilians and governments. The general public are those who want to use the service, and governments are the ones who want to contract the service to these companies and ensure that their citizens get the best deal. So they're almost like a customer with like privilege because they offer the contracts and decide ultimately who gets them or who can operate those lines. But they are still customers. The bus companies still need to attract governments to their way of operation and convince them that they are the best option for that route. So geographically, public transport's everywhere. There's a strong correlation between economic improvement with how interlinked societies are. So, there's no real dispersion between public transport, but it is worth noting that public versus private transport sector dominance is a thing. So in European nations, most are government owned, but in Asia, there is sort of a dichotomy between, China have quite a large amount of government ownership of their public transport, but Japan have a highly privatized public transport network rather. So customer states are patchy. They're not Menta are probably not going to want to move into a market that's dominated by state-owned transport companies. They're very much going to look for these privatized, competitive markets where they can, ruffle some feathers without competition issues, because naturally in state-owned transport industries or ones dominated by those, there's not a lot of competition. They simply do those routes and it's almost predetermined. So, what are the changing demands of consumers? Well, essentially the main one is lower prices. It's one of the key areas where the companies and the customers disagree. Companies cite rising costs throughout the recent years, but customers, they are pretty outraged at these high profit margins and the higher and higher ticket prices that they have to pay. So this is one of the key areas where, CSR and careful planning comes in, because, they don't want to annoy customers, so they utilize different transport modes such as Uber or a train, for example. Buses are not the only option. In terms of changing trends in the industry at large, electronic tickets, as we've covered, meant to have these, and alternative fuels, which, as we mentioned, meant to don't have. So, just to go over very briefly again, the customers are dispersed between, markets that are public-owned, company-dominated, and those that are mostly privatized. And the mostly privatized are the real customer nations for Menta if they want to expand. And obviously, the general population of any market is what they also want to appeal to. As we move to the changing demands, Menta are experimenting with driverless vehicles to bring down wage costs, so travel fare may go down for Menta's operations, but importantly, they can't be too stingy looking for those really high profit margins. It will really annoy the day-to-day customer, and it may push them towards utilizing ride-sharing services, for example, and we're going to see that a few more times as we get to some industry examples. So, something worth thinking about. I just wanted to take a few minutes of your time to first extend my hope that you enjoyed the free sample that you've just viewed, but also to just sort of explain what else Astranti do to help you pass your exam really effectively, provided you found our sample particularly interesting and insightful, of course. So, of course, we have a study text for every module, ranging from P1 to F3, and the certificate level is also free on our website. So we have study texts throughout the CIMA course, every module you could hope to study. The certificate level are free, as I mentioned, and then the rest of them, ranging from P1 to F3, are all available to purchase. Alongside this, if you're not so much a study text kind of student and you prefer a visual way of learning, we have the course videos. We essentially break down the study text into bite-sized presentations with a walkthrough, and it's a very very, very engaging way of explaining the course. Following this, we have the pre-scene analysis, where we break down each pre-scene sitting into a number of videos, going through the whole document, but also adding a top 10 recommendations for what will come up in the exam, and also a strategic analysis where we put all the models you'd find in E2, for example, to the pre-scene itself, whichever that may be at the time. Alongside this, we provide an industry analysis. This is a document and accompanying video which help you give that contextual information in your exam. So, for example, if the pre-scene is on the oil industry, the industry analysis will break down the oil industry, the current topics, trends, issues, what the competitive market looks like, all those kind of aspects, all condensed into one so you can spend your time wisely in your study period. Following on from this, when you actually want to practice all this knowledge, we have mock exams for all of our materials. So StudyText has a generic mock exam based on the module, whereas the pre-scene analysis has mocks available to purchase that are based on that specific pre-scene, that are targeted to the key issues we believe will come up. And if you're not content with just doing those mock exams and practicing that way, we have a marking and feedback system where you can purchase the ability to send in your paper, have it marked by a CIMA qualified accountant, and get personalized feedback on whether you can improve X or Y area. And sort of finally, if you will, if you're feeling really underprepared and that exam is coming really, really soon, the master classes are offered by Astranti, and they're essentially a crash course in anything you could want for that topic. So if it's a master class on the pre-scene, it's going to give you absolutely everything that you could possibly need to know about the pre-scene in one really condensed sitting. Likewise, if it was the F3 masterclass, you would have all of F3 gone through in a very crash course style presentation and video link. You can also purchase it post-stream as opposed to viewing it live, all these kind of aspects. We are very, very confident that these materials will help you get the exam success that you want. So we have a pass guarantee. Provided you fill out a form which demonstrates that you have utilized our materials to a large extent, and actually taken the time to study them, and you have unfortunately failed, we will offer you the same materials again for the next sitting as a consolidatory offer to ensure that you can get back on the horse and get that exam grade that you want. With that said, thank you very much for watching the sample video. I hope you enjoyed it and it gives you a lot of confidence in Astranti and your CIMA future.